Welcome to the very last piece of content, part of the curriculum that you need to know for the AP exam, for the AP course, AP Macroeconomics. Congratulations on making it this far. Again, I apologize for not being there in person to share this with you, but I will be there next week so that we can review prior to Songkran. And then for all of you who are willing and wanting to come back, either before or during study leave, I'm happy to answer any and all questions you have. Whereas fiscal policy is totally concerned with how the government spends money, the decisions they make around spending money, and then also the decisions they make around taxing and applying taxes to various parties in the economy. Monetary policy is the purview or is controlled by the central bank of every country, typically. So in the United States, which is what the AP course is concerned with, it's the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is nominally located in Washington, D.C., but the most powerful Federal Reserve Bank is in New York. Federal Reserve has all kinds of critics, some supporters, but if you dig into it, there's actually a lot of very, very, very interesting conspiracy theories, concerns, things that have been raised about the Federal Reserve in the United States. So if you're curious, please ask. If you're curious, please go looking for it yourself, but we won't have time to do it in the AP. As always, begin with a quote from Shakespeare, if money go before, always do lie open, which is true in many respects. Money isn't everything, but it does facilitate a lot of things. So monetary policy, central bank of every country. So you have the Fed, which is the United States, Bank of Japan, the BOJ, the ECB, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Bundesbank, which is the Bank of Germany, PBOC, the People's Bank of China, the BOI, the Bank of India. All of these central banks regulate monetary policy in the respective countries. And all of them are really focused on those main economic goals. So full employment, price stability, long-run economic growth, and to a much lesser extent, equity or equality of income. So the way they do this primarily, whereas the levers for fiscal policy are spending and taxes, so far as the AP would have you learn, for monetary policy, the levers are controlling the money supply and then controlling interest rates. So those are the two basic things that the central bank does when they do monetary policy. And again, monetary policy is just used to make sure that the economy grows, hopefully, in a way that has price stability and also promotes full employment for people. So there was a chairman of the Federal Reserve in the 50s, and he was a longtime chairman, and he's quite well known in monetary policy circles just because of how long he had the job. But he did have this analogy for what a central bank does, and he used the idea of a party. You're at a party, and of course none of you have been to a party, especially a party where they serve alcohol. But if you had been to a party, like adults typically go to, where they have alcohol, oftentimes there is a point in the party that is optimal. People are happy, people are talking, people are comfortable with each other, maybe they've had a little bit to drink, but it is a comfortable level for everyone. It is an optimal level for everyone. Everyone is happy at that point. Unfortunately, some people drink too much. Unfortunately, some people go too far. And at that point, the vibe of the party gets killed a little bit as that person maybe gets angry, maybe they get in a fight, maybe they throw up, any of those things. But the idea is a central bank should attempt to achieve that optimal balance in the party through their monetary policy. So just the right amount of money in the system, just the right amount of money supply, just the right amount of interest rates, not too high, not too low. Or if it's low, not too low for too long, not too high for too long, in order to achieve that optimal balance for the economy. If you like music, you could think of it in terms of being a DJ and trying to control the energy in the room through the tracks that you play, trying to make sure that it's not too soft or too slow or too hard or too fast, but somewhere in the middle that achieves that optimal energy. Or if you're a musician and you have a set list, your band is trying to achieve that optimal balance for the crowd. Anyway, it's very difficult to do this optimal balance in real life. If we think about a complex system such as the United States, hundreds of millions of people there, each with their own idea about what to do. It's difficult or impossible for a central bank or anyone to optimally control everything that they might do to achieve an optimal outcome. So again, monetary policy is impossible to do perfectly. And I think a lot of people accept that, and a lot of others still have difficulty accepting that there's limits to what the central bank or Federal Reserve can do. So types, this is very similar to fiscal policy. We have expansionary monetary policy. We also call this easy money. We're trying to, and for the purposes of the AP, you're typically starting in a recession or below full employment equilibrium, and you use expansionary monetary policy to expand the economy, increase output, and hopefully get back to that long-run equilibrium. Whereas contractionary policy, we're starting with perhaps an inflationary gap, a positive output gap, or beyond full employment output. We want to tighten the money supply probably, contract the economy, and bring it back to long-run economic equilibrium. So the Federal Reserve in the United States, the Central Bank of the United States, is typically said to have a dual mandate. They need to look after inflation, but then they also need to look after unemployment. If you think back to the Phillips curve, you realize that there is a trade-off, even though it's a little bit erratic. It's been debunked a bit, but there still is a relationship between unemployment and inflation. And the fact that the Federal Reserve is asked to look after or attempt to control both suggests that they're probably on a mission to fail, just because of how difficult it is to maybe even look after one, but much less look after two separate economic indicators that can be in conflict with each other because they do have trade-offs. So not something that you need to get into the details or specifics of. Just know that the dual mandate exists, and it's incredibly problematic for the Federal Reserve. So tools, there are several. You've already been introduced to the ones that are most important for the AP. The first is the required reserve ratio. I'll mention something about contractual clearing balances in a little bit. Discount rate, and then OMOs, open market operations. If you can remember these three, you're good to go. There are others. In fact, there's a lot of others, especially with COVID, especially with how long we've had easy money policy. They've invented all kinds of facilities to inject or allow more money to make its way into the economy. AP doesn't believe any of these exist. So you don't need to know these for the AP exam. If you can remember required reserve ratio, if you can remember discount rate and open market operations, you have all the knowledge tools you need to be successful on the AP exam. Is this a certain impoverishment of your economic education? Yes, because all these other tools, all these other facilities that have been introduced are very important for how the United States Federal Reserve actually works. So this one we've been over before, but again, it's the percentage of money that the commercial bank needs to keep in reserve based on consumer deposits. So they keep this on reserve in case the customers come back. You can determine the money multiplier from this required reserve ratio. If you recall, expansionary would be to decrease the required reserve ratio so that banks can lend more. Contractionary would be to increase the required reserve ratio so they're required to hold on to more money, which means less excess reserves, which means less loans are created. So this is used infrequently in practice, so it usually stays around 10%. Contractual clearing balances, again, don't worry about this for the AP exam. You can just kind of remember right now and not pay too close attention. But this is essentially requiring banks to keep a certain amount of money at the Federal Reserve. So if you remember back in the beginning, the Federal Reserve is the banker's bank. So they are a bank for all the other commercial banks in the country. So all the commercial banks in the country have an account with the Federal Reserve where they can actually keep money at the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve loves when banks keep money with the Federal Reserve because they can actually see at that point how much money the banks have set aside. Of course, this isn't all the money that the banks have, but it does give the Federal Reserve some visibility as to what the banking system looks like overall. So that's why they typically appreciate this. Open market operations are OMOs. Again, we've been over this before, but it's the buying and selling of government securities, aka bonds. So the actions help to The buying or selling of these bonds help to reduce or increase excess reserves, which helps to reduce or increase the amount of loans created, which governs the amount of money created in the economy. So if you can remember expansionary policy, buy bonds equals bigger bucks. They buy bonds, which means people who had the bond receive money. Those people with money put them in the banking system. Banking system reserves part of it, lends out the excess reserves, more money supply is created. Contractionary policy would be the opposite, sell bonds, smaller bucks. So again, these are things we've been over before. We assume for the AP that this is the primary tool of monetary policy, what the Federal Reserve uses most of the time to control the money supply, control interest rates, and then achieve those three economic goals. Discount rate is the last one, and this is just the interest rate that the Fed charges banks for loans. So expansionary would be to decrease the discount rate, make it cheaper and easier for banks to borrow. And then contractionary would be to increase the discount rate, increasing the cost of borrowing money from the Fed, which discourages banks from borrowing money from the Fed. So it's a secondary tool. It doesn't get used as much. The other thing to note about the discount window is that banks often don't like to be seen using the discount window. It's not quite a sign of weakness, but the banking system is based on trust. And if a bank is seen as accessing the discount window and is seen as needing money, the bank can also be seen or perceived as being weak, which would be more difficult for that bank to have interactions and transactions with other banks. Because if you think the bank is weak, if you think they may be running into trouble, you may require that bank to put up additional collateral, which means put up additional money every time they want to do something with you, just in case, because you're worried about them maybe going bankrupt or having to close their doors. So one thing, and this is probably the biggest thing about all monetary policy, the AP doesn't seem to think anything of what the Federal Reserve has done after 2008. It's insane, really it is. Everything that they assess, everything on the exam, tends to be, and almost always has been, how things were before 2008, which is a lifetime ago for some of y'all. I'm sorry. It really should be updated. It has not. It does simplify your life for the AP exam, but again, it does impoverish your economic life for understanding what's happening today. Okay. The term auction facility is a more new facility. I'm not going to go into it. If you're curious, come ask. It's extremely unlikely to be on the AP exam. Why do banks need overnight loans? Typically, banks seek to maximize profits. They lend out a bunch of money, typically. Sometimes they lend out more money than they necessarily have in reserves, so they need to borrow reserves from other banks or from the Federal Reserve, just to make sure that they have that required level of reserves in their possession. And we'll stop there and start the new section.